Hey guys, it's Knight here, and today we're going to be discussing geographical advantages and disadvantages in the World War II Pacific Theater. Yeah, so let's get started. Some main geographical advantages for the Japanese and the Americans and Australians and Allies. The islands is a major strategic one, because the United States had Hawaii, which was in about mid-Pacific range. It was about in that area, where we could launch our Pacific Fleet into combat from that position pretty rapidly. And the Japanese had, at the time, they were going on their island campaign and their conquering Asia campaign. So when they attacked Pearl Harbor, which was a strategic strike that could have gone better for the Japanese, because on that day they had planned a third aerial attack, and for one reason or another they just decided not to go with it. They just decided not to launch it. And if they had, they probably would have delayed the United States' entrance into World War II. And by the time we would have been ready to go back out and use, well, more or less, our ships would have been having to go to San Diego, San Francisco, and places all along the Pacific coast of mainland U.S. And that would have been a strategic disadvantage for us because we don't have a defensive line out there at Hawaii. We didn't at the time. And if they had launched that third strike, they could have easily taken Hawaii and Midway, and we probably could have lost Alaska as well, and maybe even all of World War II, because we would have had to be launching warships and aircraft out of San Diego, and we would be having to do what Britain had to do during the war, which is air raid sirens, because the Japanese would have had an excellent forward operating base, or as I'm going to refer to it, as an FOB. So we probably would have lost the war. So the next geographical advantage is the ocean itself. It's a large mass of water, and water at the time was not easily traversable. As in the air, you could travel more distance in the air than you could by sea, so it took longer for the enemy to reach each other. And it also opened up an area where you could hide very effectively. And the Japanese fleet did that. They used the Pacific Ocean as its cloaking device somewhat. It hid them because it's so big, it's so massive. Yeah, you don't see stuff like that anymore. Well, you do, but strategically using it as a hit and run, not more. Another geographical advantage that was on the islands, Iwo had a volcano. Can't remember the name of it for the life of me. Anyway, Iwo had a volcano on the island, so it had volcanic ash on its beaches, which is soft and it sinks when under a lot of pressure, like a tank or a jeep or an amphibious landing vehicle. And that slowed down the Americans' invasion of Iwo Jima, but nonetheless the Americans still took it. But we weren't able to get heavy armor on some of the beaches because they were coated in the volcanic ash. So volcanoes were definitely some sort of an advantage defensively. Then you've got archipelagos, which there were a few. You have the Solomon Islands and the Philippines. The Solomon Islands, that's where you had Guadalcanal and island naval battles like that. Guadalcanal was a fierce battle. It took a long time for us to clear out the Solomon Islands because we were on what was at the time was called an island hopping campaign, which means we were going from one island to the next as fast as possible, just trying to push the Japanese out and back to Japan. The Philippines was where MacArthur, General Douglas MacArthur, went into combat again back in the Philippines. He went in and fulfilled a promise he had made to the people, to the Filipinos, or people of Philippines. He went in and liberated the Philippines, and then we started to attack Okinawa, which, well, we all know what happened after that. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yeah. Another geographical advantage was the jungles. The jungles were an advantage due to the fact that you could hide in them relatively easily, and you could also hide large artillery. If you're clever enough and skilled enough, an airfield and tanks, armored personnel carriers, you can hide a lot in a jungle, which is what the Japanese did on the islands as a defensive bonus. One, it's hard to traverse a jungle because it's thick and brush. It's a jungle. So the Japanese traversed it much easier than the Americans did because the Japanese were there first and they were able to lay traps like landmines, sinkholes that they had dug and put a tarp over and covered up a bit to camouflage it. They've done a lot. They did a lot to those jungles that I'm not sure if it's fully cleared out. So if you ever go to Pacific Islands over near Japan, like Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, I'm pretty sure they're cleared out by now, but still, be careful if you're going through the jungle. Another advantage for an island is you can concentrate more troops on that island to a specific place, where in Europe, your troops were spread out a lot, and you had continuous fighting all over your front, which is quite interesting, to say the least. Because of the fact that you have to, well, there's a lot more people there, but on an island, it's a little easier to defend. Now let's get into disadvantages, which is the islands themselves. Now, I said they were an advantage. Yes, they are. Islands are kind of yes and no, kind of a coin toss. Islands are good because they are easy to defend, but the disadvantage is it is very, very easy to get cut off from your supply lines, and once you're cut off from your supply lines, you're done for. It's only a matter of time. Really is. Doesn't matter how good you are. You are not gonna last with your supply lines severed. You're gonna run out of food, run out of water, and eventually run out of manpower, which it's very easy to do in the Pacific campaign. Volcanoes, they're a disadvantage for an attacking side, as I said earlier, with the volcanic ash as a defensive kind of plus for Iwo Jima. I would say it's a disadvantage as well, because it could have erupted at any point in time, but it didn't. So I'm going to kind of leave it there as a kind of a advantage, because a volcano is also a mountain. So you can climb up on a volcano, and there's a couple more advantages to that. Another disadvantage is the ocean itself. Again, yes, it's easy to hide your ships, but it's also hard to refuel, resupply, rearm your ships as well. Because to traverse the Pacific Ocean, to do that, you need a lot of fuel. And to fight a war, you need a lot of fuel, a lot of supply ships that have extra fuel, and you also need munitions, which is ammo, basically. And you really couldn't cross the Pacific Ocean without an FOB. Or, yeah, you couldn't really cross it without an FOB. So, you have that, which Japan had quite a few forward operating bases, which they used fairly well, but Japan's biggest fault or flaw was not sending that third airstrike on Pearl Harbor. Because the first one, I'm not sure what the intentions were, but like the first two were to take out defenses, ships, airfields, airplanes, stuff like that. That's what the first two were meant to do. The third wave was supposed to take out our oil supplies, and fuel, which would have been horrific. And I think that Japan, the reason they didn't send it was because their main target was the United States aircraft carriers, which there weren't any there were a few close by, but not close enough to Pearl. Enterprise, I believe, was north or south. I don't remember which, but it was towards the east and north or south of Hawaii. Then USS Lexington was out at midway deploying a Marine detachment. There might have been a carrier in San Diego. I can't remember the name of it. Then you had, I think it's Hornet and Yorktown were over in the Atlantic, protecting convoys over there. So you had that. So not all American carriers were in the Pacific, but when full-on war broke out in 41 to 42, Yorktown and Hornet were there. Lexington was there. Basically, every U.S. aircraft carrier was in the Pacific. And in the Atlantic, the U.S. had started sending battleships, cruisers, destroyers, aircraft, and we're starting to push the Germans back into Germany. So, and we were also going into Africa, Europe, and technically, here's how it was. Here's what America was doing. America was technically fighting a two-front war. The reason I say that is we had Germany and Italy to the east of us, and we had Japan to the west. Two fronts. We were fighting Japan with our naval and air forces. Well, some of our air forces. Carrier-based air forces, I should say. So they were fighting over in the Pacific. Our land-based air forces, our army, and our armies were in Europe. Our Marine Corps was in the Pacific. We had it fairly divided, our forces, but the advantage we had over Germany in fighting a two-front war, we had the factories, we had the manpower, and we had the money. Well, we were coming out of the Great Depression, so we could definitely break their economy. We could have outlasted Germany and Japan fairly well, considering the US also moved forces into China and started fighting the Japanese and pushing them out of China. And that's where you get the flying tigers and everything else that happened over there. And it's really an interesting thought when you look at what we could be doing today if Japan had not launched that third strike, because that would have crippled the United States Navy and it would have just ruined us. We probably wouldn't have been able to recover fast enough, and we probably would have lost the Pacific Theater, which means we wouldn't be speaking English. We would probably be speaking Japanese or maybe German. Probably Japanese. But I believe it was Yamamoto who said, if we attack the if we invade the United States, there will be an American with a gun behind every blade of grass. And I agree with him. There would have been. There's a lot more Americans than there are Japanese in America. So we had that.